In our last couple of videos, we looked at the east side of the 1000 block of Military Street. Now let's walk across the street to the west side, and let's start with this building right here. Today it's the Center for Human Resources, but at one time it was the Elks Temple. And if this building looks familiar to you, it's because the entire first floor is still there. That's where the Center for Human Resources is located at. If you look at the current picture in the inset here, you can see the same outline of that first floor. You see the first three windows on the first floor, then you see the door entry with the small window on each side of it, and then you see the next three windows. And then you notice the current picture has two more windows in addition. So at some point they made an addition to the building. And of course they added this crown point to the top of the current building. In later years, this ground floor would become the Boardwalk and Park Place restaurant. Notice in the front of the building there is a little variance. Here in the picture of the Elks Temple, you see that the door step is pretty much even with the sidewalk. But if you look at the current picture, you'll see that there's some steps or incline up to the front door. So at some point in time, the sidewalk and the street were at a lower elevation, or brought to a lower elevation, resulting in causing a step up or an incline to the front door step. In this postcard of the Elks Temple, it shows what happens when you don't have stoplights or stop signs. Everybody pretty much does whatever they want to do when they're driving. I've seen roundabouts that are very similar to this. This postcard shows the inside of the Elks Temple, entitled The Reading Room. As we zoom in here, we can note a couple things. Number one, the spittoons, but not only the spittoons, but the number of the spittoons. I can understand having one on each side of the sofa, but why in the world do they have one over there by the radiator? Who knows? Maybe it was a challenge. See who could hit it. Of course, the radiator supplied the steam heat for the building, and you notice they have two of them here, at least that we can see in this room. And then also the light that provided the light for the reading is the chandelier above the sofa, which we can see here. In the back of the postcard we see this typed out quite neatly, describing that the dining room is now open at the Elks Temple, and that they catered to private dinner parties. They had certain rooms set up for that, and that was also under new management, and they wanted to have folks know that. And if you wanted the telephone number was 343, pretty easy to remember. Notice writing in green for the address, and also he wrote something right across the postcard that was typed there. And if we can't read it completely, but we get the gist of it, because it says that this is a lonesome town. And as this caption on this postcard explains, this is the reception room at the Elks Lodge or Elks Temple. And you can see here it's pretty ornate carpeting going up the stairs, and if you look to your left, you can see the elk head there in the corner. You recall in a previous video we looked at another elk's head. It was about 1 block north of this building, and this was the original Elks Temple. They were at this location until about 1912, when they built the building that we've been looking at. In this photo we have a Coast Guard auxiliary, looks like a luncheon that was being held at the Elks. And in this photo here, we see the Elks, and they're having a memorial service. And we'll take just a moment to pan through this photo because it's interesting. It's one of the few that we can see of inside the Elks Temple when it was there. I'm not sure of the date of this parade that we see here in this photo, but we can see that the Elks Temple is still there, all 3 floors of it. This building was here in its entirety until 1982 or 1983. There's 2 conflicting dates here, but you get the general idea. The early 80s, it was destroyed, pretty much, at least the interior was. I think it was that time where they finally went to the 1-floor building as well. This photo here gives you a good idea what the side of the building looked like. It was quite a unique building with the windows like they were, and also the bottom floor being of a different construction, and the facade made a definite different look. This photo here gives you a pretty good view of the Vining Thompson furniture company. You can see here the front of it. Probably the best view we have. It was a pretty nice looking building, actually. In this photo here, if you look closely behind the Elks Temple, and also in this photo here, you can see this building that has the steeple. And as with most buildings that have steeples, you find out it was also a church. It was the Universal Church, as we can see from this photo here. And it gives us a pretty good look at the building itself. Later on, it went on to become our first public library, at least the first public library that was in an actual building. And in this aerial view, we can get a real good look at this library. You can see the Troy Laundry across from it, but we'll look at Troy Laundry later. In this postcard here, that's someone dated 1914, we can get a pretty good look down Military Street looking north, and we can see the Miso building, and later became the People's Bank building, quite prominently. We can also see the streetcar tracks going down Military as well. Also note that Military Street was brick at that time. And then as we go over here to the left, we can see the Elks Temple. So what was there before the Elks Temple? Well, if you look at this postcard right here, we want to focus right toward the end of the block. As we zoom in, we can see that there's a house at the end of the block. We see there's a house there with an awning, and then the one right next to it. The building that has the enclosed staircase going to the 2nd floor is actually on the other side of Pine Street. But this building that we're looking at, this house that we're looking at, is actually a boarding house, and it's set right where the Elks Temple was built. The house was owned by Henry Klein, and of course was called Klein's Boarding House. And here we have another photo, not real clear, but it gives you a pretty good idea what it'll look like. The sign on the left here looks like it says boarding and meals, and on the right it looks like the place is for sale. Today, the rest of the block looks pretty much like this, just the rest of this building and pretty much the parking lot, and that's it. And at one time, this block held a lot of things. It held a floor covering store, a furniture store, a bowling alley, car dealerships, gas station, flower shop, an armory, and a billiard hall. A lot of things over the years. Even in this photo, you don't see a lot in this block. You see the Elks there, and right next to it, you can see Vining Thompson Furniture Store. When I was growing up, Strike's floor covering was there, and Vining Thompson was further down the block, but later on they moved into this location here next to the Elks. And of course at the end of the block you can see the Shell gas station there. Here we see that National Billiards used to be next to the Elks Temple, and just to the south of that you can see the Vining Thompson Furniture Store before they moved next door, right next to the Elks. In this photo showing the fire damage to the Elks, you've got a pretty good view here of the newer Vining Thompson when they moved next to the Elks. Not a bad looking building at all. This was also the location of Parfait Motors, one of their many locations. They later went on to go across the street and open a dealership, and then later on down on Military on the east side further down, they opened another dealership. Notice it says Ford, Mercury, Lincoln, and Lincoln Zephyr. And I'm wondering, what in the world is a Lincoln Zephyr? So this is what a Lincoln Zephyr is. I had one of these when I was a boy. My dad brought it home, and he says this car has a magic radio. And so we both were sitting in the car, and he says, "Radio go on," and the radio would go on. Radio go off, the radio would go off. I thought it was magic. And then I realized that after he told me, there was a switch on the floor, similar to a bright light switch that you used to click on and off on the floor that turned the radio on and off. Pretty high tech way back then. Of course, when we had the car, it was certainly used. We didn't buy a new one. As we continue down in the block, and we see Vining Thompson furniture store, the area next to that, there used to be a used car lot. That when Peyton used to have their car dealership across the street, and also Launderville, they used to have their used car lot on the opposite side of the street, right where this location would be next to the Vining Thompson store. And as you can see by this map, as we zoom in here, that whole middle of the block there was the used car lot. And on the right, you can see the Elks Temple with the furniture store next to that. And then on the opposite end, the south end, you can see the gas station. So that's pretty much what the block looked like back then. In the 1940s, there was a bowling alley there called the Red Crown Recreation Bowling Alleys. And here we have a picture of it. At least we see the destruction of that bowling alley here and by a fire. The fire took place in December of 1945, and the building was completely destroyed. Here we have an article in a newspaper, an out-of-town newspaper, describing the fire from December of 1945. Fire does $100,000 damage in Port Huron. Fire of undetermined origin today destroyed the Red Crown Recreation Building here and damaged an adjoining two-story structure. Preliminary estimates of loss range as high as $100,000. One-story recreation building, formerly the Port Huron Armory, contained some half-dozen bowling alleys. The adjoining structure housed a cocktail bar, a gift shop, and a flower shop on the first floor, and apartments on the second. The blaze was discovered at 3:45 a.m. and was brought under control several hours later. And this photo here gives you a pretty good idea where this fire was. You can see the Desmond Theater across the street. There was another business that was completely demolished in that same block, right next to the Elks, actually across from the Huron Theater. And that business was Michigan Rent to Own. And you can see in this photo here with Vining Thompson just to the south of it. After Michigan Rent to Own was burnt down to the ground, Vining Thompson Furniture Store took over that space and put an addition onto their building. So if you look at the picture in the inset, you can see it goes right up next to the Elks, where originally it was actually 2 doors down. And before that, a couple more doors down. I think this fire took place in about the 1980s. If you recall from the newspaper article regarding the first fire we looked at, this is where the old armory used to be. And here we are looking north on Military across from the Harrington Hotel pretty much. The armory, of course, is the building with the circular windows on each side of the doorways on the second floor. And of course, everything looks better in color. As we zoom in here, we can get a little better look at it. After the armory had moved to a new location, Yoakum Automotive took over this location and this building. And you can see it here in this advertisement. This gives us a real good look at what the armory used to look like. If you look real close, you can see the latest model automobiles hot off the assembly line in the windows here. This small card here gives us a lot of information. It tells us that they represented Buick Motor Car Company, Haynes Motor Company, Rio Motor Company, EMF Company, which was a Port Huron company, and the largest representation of standard cars in Michigan. Of course, the telephone was 154. And we have a picture of Mr. Yoakum here as we turn it around to get a better look at him. In this advertisement here, he says, best equipped garage and sales room in Michigan. That's probably saying quite a bit since Detroit is not too far from us. Also, they had touring cars to rent. And he's one of the few dealers in Fort Huron to get into the large truck sales. So he did a pretty good business, I think, mainly in the 20s and 30s. This advertisement for the trucks must have been much later, because if you notice the telephone number, it went from 154 to 2261. Quite a few more telephones in Fort Huron by that time. The building just south of the old armory was the American Hotel. This was the inexpensive alternative to the more expensive Harrington Hotel across the street. While the Harrington Hotel charged a whopping $2.50 a night, the American Hotel charged only $1. Of course, the American Hotel had none of the amenities that the Harrington Hotel had, and if you look at their payroll, you can see that the American Hotel had a grand total of 5 employees, 3 female and 2 male, whereas the Harrington Hotel had a grand total of 48, 25 female and 23 male. So it makes a big difference when you have those kind of expenses. From all the way back in the 1920s, there's always a gas station at the end of the block. Here we can see it was a Shell station, but over the years it was a Super S station. And of course, also it was a Speedway 79 station, as you can see here. This was the Speedway as we look at the Harrington Hotel across the street. But today that corner is just a parking lot. In our next video, we'll mosey on down to the 1100 block of Military Street. See what there is to see there.